Hello, my name's Emma Treadaway. This is my reflective video as part of assignment 2 for learning and development. Now, this was an interesting exercise because it helped me to understand that there's this gap between the academic theory and then the classroom practice. And I think interviewing Emily has made me see that actually it takes a mixture of theories, but that's also got to be blended with, personal experience in the role, some situational awareness of the environment and the students that are with you. And it's those things together that will make a difference in the classroom. Now, while Emily's responses aligned closely with that academic literature, there were also several occasions throughout the interview where I recognised that she was blending several different science concepts together. And rather than seeing that as sort of a mistake, I actually think it beautifully demonstrates the complexities of teaching, where even experienced teachers will draw on multiple theories simultaneously without necessarily naming them in their practice. Ultimately, though, I think this interview process has reinforced that human development underpins so much in teaching, and it is incredibly beneficial for teachers to have a solid understanding. Knowing about childhood development enables teachers to respond intentionally and strategically rather than just reacting to a situation. So as part of the physical and language development part of the interview, I think one of the strongest messages throughout these first two questions was that children begin school with vastly different developmental experiences. So Emily explained things like preschool attendance, different opportunities for oral language development at home, things like being read to, fine motor experiences such as crafts, but also some of those adverse childhood experiences such as neglect. These all having an impact on a child's readiness for school. She noted that children arrive with different strengths, but also different needs, and it requires the teacher to identify where a student might be functioning below expectations and then provide appropriate support through differentiation, SLSO support, tailored in-class intervention, but also having that collaboration with the student and their family. This immediately reminded me of Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory, which views the child's development as an ongoing interaction between the child, obviously at the centre, and then multiple environments or systems around them. So rather than seeing development occurring in isolation, Bronfenbrenner recognised that there are these distinct influences such as family, the school, community, and then broader social systems. And I think Emily's examples strongly reflected this theory, particularly when she discussed the different experiences children bring to school, which depend on their home environment and their early childhood opportunities. But it could also very much be connected with Maslow's hierarchy of needs too, and whether or not those needs are being met at home, and whether the child is coming to school with barriers to their learning because of things like neglect, trust or safety or difficult situations at home. I also think the quality of a child's early experiences will help to shape the architecture of their developing brain. So these experiences can help to create either strong neural pathways or they will be weaker and less connections, which will either help or it will hinder their future learning, behaviour and also their well-being. So one area of the interview that extended my thinking was Emily's emphasis on parental involvement. And I agree that positive home partnerships are invaluable. And I also know that through what we've been learning in this unit, that children's development is not solely determined just on parents, whether it be good or bad experiences. We know that Bronfenbrenner has those systems, and that reminds us that there is multiple systems interacting around that child at the centre. We've got the socioeconomic circumstances as well. We've got quality childhood education, community supports, cultural influences, and also those broader societal influences. And it's up to the teacher to work within a range of different influences to support the children as best they can. Emily identified when we have children functioning below expectations, it's our job to make observation. She obviously rightly pointed out that we're not medical professionals, but sometimes it's a teacher. We are the first people that our parent will come across that will point out things that their child is having difficulty with, such as their oral, their gross motor skills, their fine motor, their coordination, whatever it may be. And it's these observations, and as Emily put it quite rightly, that we have to be really having those sensitive conversations with parents about. This part of the interview really enforced to me that there is such an importance on building strong and collaborative relationships with families and also specialist staff who are going to be supporting students. And I think early identification enables intervention to occur, and it doesn't mean that that child can't catch up if they are having those early intervention services. It just means that we can wrap the support services around them and, I guess, get that child on track and able to be thriving as quickly as possible. The key takeaway for me from the interview with Emily regarding physical and language development was not to make assumptions. Developmental differences to me are starting points for teaching, and they do not limit a child's potential. Having those high expectations and then providing appropriate scaffolding and support will set up every student to experience success. And that's ultimately the most important part of our job. I found the cognitive development section of the interview to be one of the most thought-provoking because it brought together many of the learning theories that we have explored throughout this unit. So Emily discussed developmental readiness, she discussed explicit instruction, cognitive load theory, retrieval practice, student motivation, and differentiation. Much of what she said aligned closely with the current research. There were also areas within this where I found myself reflecting kind of critically on how these different theories complement one another. And one of the first concepts that Emily discussed was the relationship between Piaget's theory of developmental readiness and Vygotsky's theory of scaffolded learning. And reflecting on this now, I can see that those theories are complementary rather than contradictory. So Piaget reminds us that children construct understanding as their thinking develops, while Vygotsky highlights the important role that teachers and peers and others play within the zone of proximal development. Emily's classroom examples demonstrated that teachers naturally draw on both perspectives. Some students will genuinely require additional developmental support and more time, while others will benefit from carefully scaffolded instruction that lets them achieve beyond what they could accomplish independently. This became particularly evident when Emily described her student with DeGeorge syndrome and autism spectrum disorder, whose chronological age did not match her cognitive abilities. So rather than lowering the expectations or excluding her from certain classroom learning experiences, Emily explained that the student participated alongside her peers, but she received highly scaffolded and differentiated tasks, and she was supported through things like repetition, guided practice, and explicit instruction. I found this example particularly powerful because it reinforced that differentiation is not about reducing expectations, but adjusting the level of support required to students so that they can successfully access the curriculum just like their peers. It also reminded me that developmental age and chronological age do not always align, and that effective teachers continually respond to where students are currently functioning, rather than assuming that children all that are at the same age will all be able to learn in the same way. Another significant part of the discussion centered around explicit instruction. So Emily described that the current shift going back to explicit instruction, and she explained that teachers will be first modeling that new learning, then they'll practice it with their students before gradually releasing the responsibility and letting those students work independently. But this actually reminded me of like the gradual release of responsibility model, which is often described as I do, we do, you do. This became clearer when Emily was discussing cognitive load theory. During the interview, she explained that one of her students often forgets concepts and that they're continually revisiting, and she referred to cognitive load theory quite a lot. And while I agree with the importance of revisiting prior studying, the New South Wales Department have a guide called the Cognitive Load in Practice Guide. And I read through that, and that actually helped me understand cognitive load theory a little bit more. And it's much more broader than just retrieval practice. That guide explains that working memory has a very limited capacity, and we have limited capacity to process new information. If too much information is introduced all at once, then the working memory becomes overloaded and learning can slow down or even stop. Consequently, effective teaching focuses on reducing unnecessary cognitive load while gradually building students' knowledge and understanding. Reflecting on this now, I realise that many of Emily's classroom practices actually demonstrate excellent cognitive load theory principles, even though she didn't explicitly describe them by using that terminology. So Emily discussed the increased use of daily review and retrieval that is now happening within the New South Wales curriculum. And particularly in mathematics, where she gave some examples of continually revisiting this throughout the year rather than it being taught once or twice throughout the year and then being forgotten. So cognitive load theory, I think I view it as the same sort of concept. However, this unit has helped me to recognise that they work together but serve different purposes. So cognitive load theory focuses on optimising learning while new information is being introduced and carefully managing working memory, whereas retrieval practice, on the other hand, strengthens long-term memory by encouraging students to repeatedly recall those previously learned concepts and knowledge. But together, these approaches support learning and reduce cognitive overload, and they will strengthen the memory over time. Okay, so what does all this mean for my future practice? Well, rather than assuming students who are simply struggling require more practice, I now know that I need to consider whether my instruction has appropriately managed their cognitive load. And knowing what I know now, I want to intentionally reduce unnecessary demands on students' working memory by doing simple things such as breaking down complex tasks into small, manageable steps, explicitly teaching new and unfamiliar vocabulary before introducing the concept, using modeled examples, combining visuals and verbal explanations, and then doing that gradual release of responsibility once students have that confidence and understanding. These informed strategies will not only support students functioning below expectations, but provide a really strong foundation for all learners in my class. I also intend to incorporate that regular retrieval practice that Emily mentioned alongside formative assessment so that I can identify where there are misconceptions before they become entrenched. So this brings us to the social and emotional section of the interview, which actually resonated with me more than any other because it reinforced something that I repeatedly observed during my kindergarten practicum. So firstly, Emily stated that teaching is all relationship building, which I actually agree with. But regardless of whether she was describing managing behaviour, building resilience, or supporting students with additional needs, she consistently returned to the importance of building positive relationships with students, having consistency and high expectation. Now, this immediately reminded me of Erikson's psychosocial theory, particularly the stage that we're at in primary school, which is inferiority versus industry. And I've learned through that theory that children develop a sense of competence when they are provided with opportunities to experience success, to persevere through challenges, and to receive encouragement from significant adults. Repeated failure and criticism will contribute to those feelings of inferiority and reduced confidence. So reflecting on Emily's classroom examples, I realised that her consistent encouragement, her scaffolded support, and her high expectations are all helping students to develop that strong sense of competence and confidence as learners. Another concept that became much clearer through this interview process was the importance of explicitly teaching social emotional skills. So we've looked at CASEL, which identifies 5 competencies that students require to succeed academically, socially, emotionally: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. So rather than assuming these skills naturally develop, CASEL urges that they should be taught intentionally, the same as literacy or numeracy. So one area that particularly extended my thinking was Emily's discussion about classroom expectations and behaviour. So initially I viewed behaviour management primarily as like maintaining the order within the classroom. However, after completing this unit, I now know that those consistent expectations also contribute to students developing that self-management and that emotional regulation within themselves. So Woodfolk and Margetts explain that emotional regulation develops through maturity combined with guidance, modelling and practice rather than occurring automatically with age. Teachers, therefore, play an important role in actually explicitly teaching students how to recognise, how to understand, and then how to appropriately manage their emotions. And looking back at the interview, I noticed that Emily was naturally incorporating many of those strategies in the stuff that she was saying. She described modelling, appropriate behaviour management, explicit teaching, classroom expectations, helping students to reset after they had made poor behaviour choices, and then allowing those moments to be learning examples. So as a beginning teacher, I want to intentionally teach social and emotional wellbeing skills within the classroom rather than assuming that students will already have these skills. And to do that, I want to draw on CASEL framework. And I want every student to experience challenge alongside success so that they can gradually develop that resilience, that persistence, and that sense of belonging with the confidence to view themselves as a capable, successful learner who is achieving their own goals. And I think, as expected, Emily rejected the neuromyth that we only use 10% of our brains. I mean, of course. She explained that the brain is constantly retrieving information from our short and long-term memory. It's processing information and emotions all the time. It's doing things like listening and coordinating all of our bodily functions. This all demonstrates that misconception and that myth certainly has not influenced her teaching. The discussion, however, reinforced the importance that teachers need to use their professional judgment when they hear those new educational research coming out, and that not every popular opinion or trending idea will be supported by evidence. I believe our teaching practices should be guided by school policy, professional experience, quality peer-reviewed research, and best practice that spans a number of years, and not these kinds of neuromyths or even politics for that matter. That's not to say that we don't cycle back to good evidence when it is there. So Emily reflected on this, that there has been this return to explicit instruction, retrieval practice, cognitive load theory, which has become more prominent in her career, which were older kind of practices. This highlights that effective teachers must continually engage in professional learning, and they should stay up to date with developments in brain research and childhood development throughout their careers. Thanks.